Well, good evening, everybody. It's great that you could join us tonight. Welcome to this pop-up small group from Parenting for Faith. My name's Lucy Rycroft. I'm a member of the team here, and a really warm welcome to you, whether you're joining us for the first time or you come to these every other month and join us every time. It's great to have you. I'm really thrilled tonight that we're going to be thinking about worship, specifically helping our kids and our teens to engage with worship, which we know as parents and leaders cannot always be an easy or joyous thing. But I think tonight's going to be so encouraging and really joyous and kind of fun and reassuring, as we hear some really, really wise wisdom, advice, tips, ideas, thoughts from our guest, Becky Drake from Worship for Everyone. Becky, are you able to turn on your video and say hello, your mic? Maybe. She is here.
It says I can't start it because you've stopped it, Lucy, apparently.
Oh, I'm
I
so
think you need
sorry.
to turn it on for me.
I can. I'm very sorry, Becky. Is that better?
Yes. Yeah, it's worked. Hello, Lucy.
Hi, Becky. Thank you so much for joining us with our technical incompetence. It's
Not
very good of you.
No, it's an absolute pleasure. I'm looking forward to tonight.
Oh, me too. It's going to be super cool. And thank you to Becky Sedgwick, who will be interviewing Becky later. I'm just asking her to say hello. Hi, Becky.
Hi everyone, it's nice to be here. I'm looking forward to this one too.
Excellent. Good, good, good. So I just thought I'd give a quick little introduction on kind of what these pop-up small groups are for and why we hold them. So the point of them really is to build community because, yes, we want to learn more about sharing faith and discipling our children and helping them on their faith journey. But we want to do it in community. We want to do it ideally with the people who know us, who support us, who walk with us every day. So if you're watching this in a group, then special hello to you. If you're watching it on your own, that's fine too. You can chat about what you've heard tonight with a friend or a partner. It would be great to kind of get this discussion going and continuing beyond tonight. But that's what we're all about tonight. We're about giving you some great content, but also really encouraging you to build community with the people you do life with and just offer a safe space to discuss these things. So please engage with the people you're with if you're watching with others, whether that's on Zoom or in person. But please do engage with us as well, especially if you're sat watching on your own. You're very welcome. So please do type any comments or questions or helpful links or resources you've come across into the chat because we would love to know about those too. The Parenting for Faith approach, as you may be familiar with, is very much about parenting our children in the everyday of life, in the ups and the downs, the exciting moments, the boring moments. We're not just about church on a Sunday, we're about the all day, everyday aspect of discipleship. And you are the expert in your own child. That's what we always say here. Every family, every child, every parent is unique, and you are the expert. So our approach is really to give you the tools and the skills, and you can then take those and mold them to your own family's unique makeup and how God's created you to be. And so we really just hope that at the end of this evening, you will be able to find your next step as a family. When it comes to worship, and remember that won't look the same as the next families, or that even your best friend who's got a great approach, that might not be the right approach for your family. So please do just be really reassured in that and affirmed that you are the expert. God has given your children to you, and he will give you wisdom to parent them. So do spend some time thinking and praying about your own next steps as a result of tonight. I think oh no, Kate's just reminded me actually, there's one thing I need to tell you about, which hopefully will go on the Facebook chat. We'll pop a link on there if it's not already. We have some handouts and discussion questions for tonight. So if you are watching in a group, or if you're watching on your own with a view to playing this in the future with a group, because this will be recorded and on our website to view sort of in the future, then please do access our handouts. We create them for you specifically to each pop-up small group, and they've got loads of ideas there for discussion questions and ways that you can kind of take this content further and extend that in your group. So do go to that link, and as I said, if it's not on Facebook already, then we'll pop it on in a minute. And I think that's it. So I think with that, I am going to hand over to Becky and Becky.
Thanks, Lucy. A great intro. Worship, it's a massive topic, and Becky and I had a really nice chat about a month ago in preparation for this, and I found it such an exciting conversation, because sometimes worship feels a bit like mysterious and Sundayish. So, Becky, I just wanted to start with a really easy question, which is, what is worship?
Oh, Becky, do you think it's easy? Well,
No, straightforward. No?
thank you for that. I mean, it's broad, actually.
Yeah.
And my own husband has written a book called What is Worship? So I can't possibly do the
Not a
answer.
book's worth.
Can't do it justice in a very, very short and succinct way. But I think to start with, we often do think, don't we? We think worship's singing.
Yes.
And that's where we stop, and actually doing a deeper dive. And I think perhaps where it's a great place to start is to realize the breadth of the word, because of course, in a sense, part of our expression, and I think a God-given gift, is that we can join, particularly in a corporate setting, of course, join, sing, unite together around what we believe as a community. And singing is an incredible expression God has given us to respond to him, for sure. But of course, we know also that the Bible says that our worship is to bring our bodies as living sacrifices, as offerings to God, that is an act of worship. And now when you start seeing worship as our whole lives, our bodies as being living sacrifices, that says the extent of the surrender that God wants to see. And our entire life, the way we think, the way we behave, the decisions we make, all of that is worship, isn't it, as well? And of course, we know that loving God is also loving others. So the Bible gives us another clue that actually in how we love, we worship God. And I find that exciting, because actually, as we start to therefore unpick your question, we realize that there is a really broad scope for how we begin to disciple our children to become true worshippers. And it is so much more than singing, even though singing plays a great part.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's a great place to start, because we can get very stuck on we need to whack the CD on in the car or put the playlist on as we make dinner and dance around the kitchen. But it's more, that's important, but it's more than that. So my first main question, really, apart from that huge one, is how can we help kids learn what worship is from us?
Yes. Well, I think it's an interesting question, Becky, because I actually think if we know biblically that all of creation is praising God all of the time. I know there's a huge mystery in that, but the Bible tells us, even if we don't sing, the rocks will cry out. So there's something in the whole earth that is constantly praising. I actually do believe that a child is born with an ability to worship. Again, it feels a bit mysterious when we talk like that, but I think we only need to look at our tiny toddlers to realize that right from dot, there is an amazing sense of awe and wonder. And I think there's something very important there in those words about worship. Worship is about being in awe and marveling at our creator, or our God, at who he is, and then wanting to respond to that. Yeah. And I know from raising 4 children myself and seeing toddlers over the years, they get fascinated by the most incredible things that we just have lost by the time we're adults. So I guess one of my starting points in answer to your question is I think as parents, we have a really key role to play in nurturing and keeping alive that sense of awe and wonder in children. And I think there's a real foundation there to creating a worshipping heart. So, and I can give you a couple of examples, just really little things that as parents we can begin to do. Because my mum was brilliant at this. And so I think I've absorbed it quite naturally. As I was growing up, my mum would often, she was a real outdoorsy person, often gardening. And she would often call to me and say, Becky, come here, and open up a rose in the garden and say, just smell that flower. And she had this great habit, and I'd, take a deep breath and she'd go, doesn't it smell beautiful? Isn't God incredible? So she would pick out these very normal things in life, but she was often relating it back to the creator. And I think, again, just sowing seeds of this is worship. And I do it in my own life now with our children. Whenever there's a rainbow in the sky or a sunset, this happened 2 weeks ago. The kids know that they know I'll do this. I start calling to them, guys, come on, quick, to the window. Let's get a photograph. God's got his paintbrush out. And, it trips off the tongue for me, because actually I was raised that way. And I'll carry my children outside, show them the sunset. And actually, I think these are some of the lovely ways that we can point to the Creator. And just giving that bit of language, isn't God amazing, is actually the beginning of worship. We're seeing what the Creator has done and worshipping. So I think there's just a starting point there in terms of nature. I think another thing, Becky, I'd say is, like it always is the case when we have children, they're an incredible mirror to ourselves, aren't they? Having kids.
Yes.
It's actually often an incredible opportunity when we ask a question like this to reflect on ourselves. And I think, you know, how we approach worship, obviously, is often where our children will learn. So they're amazing observers. I know Parenting for Faith talk about this a lot, but they're amazing observers. So it's a great chance to reflect, well, how do I worship, and what am I showing my children in how I worship? You know, when they're side by side with me in church, if actually my hands are in my pockets and I'm yawning and I'm a bit switched off, they're possibly not going to be raised thinking, well, worship has, you know, is a joyful and powerful thing where we can connect and encounter God. So it's a great opportunity to explore our own opinions and responses in worship. But equally, if we can give children clues and show them how we love to relate to God in worship and connect with in the natural ways that we would just do that automatically, and somehow bring them into that.
Yeah, it's things like, you know, sometimes a response to God can be to give, for example, and that is an act of worship, the Bible tells us. But some of our kids just see us giving and they've no idea why.
Yes, there we go. So putting language again around that and explaining it, and you know, another thing I think that we can do as parents is see those times when our children are behaving in loving or slightly costly ways, and acknowledging that as worship as well. So, for example, occasionally I'll see one of my children behaving in a really selfless way to one of their siblings. And actually, that's huge for a child. Like, if I ever catch my child saying, okay, you can have your turn on the TV, or no, you can have that last muffin, or whatever it might be, those acts of selflessness are really costly and actually very honoring to God, aren't they? Again, if we're looking at worship in the broadest sense, being able to actually say to our children in that moment, that is so honoring to God. It's honoring to your brother or sister, and that makes me really happy. But actually, that brings a lot of pleasure to God's heart. Well done. You know, that's worship. Again, it's just affirming and naming that broader sense of what worship is, which is it's our whole being.
Yeah, because I think the naming thing is so important, because worship, I think, is so connected to certain things for children, isn't it? We talk with the language we use in church is about singing, essentially. And so to name that. So how can we get them started worshiping, maybe if they're new to it, or going deeper in worship? What sort of things are going to help our kid take maybe their next step on the journey of worship?
Yeah. I mean, I would say start as early as you can, but equally, if actually your kids are older and you haven't yet really done much with this, that's also okay. It's never too late to start doing something. But if you're at the beginning of your parenting journey, I think actually when children are little, it's much easier. And so everything, again, that should flow out of a natural place of what you feel comfortable with and your natural expressions of what worship are. But I remember times in our household, because music does play a really big part of our lives. We're songwriters, we're worship leaders. So that is very natural to us. Where actually when the children were little, we would get out pans and spoons and do all that kind of noisy stuff that you do with small children. And we'd whack on the worship CD and dance joyfully. And it's a great opportunity to say things like, do you know, all the way through the Bible, it says you can make a noise for God, or we can shout. And just making those times that you would be playful anyway, fun, joyful, but again, pointing them towards God. So I think when they're little, bringing stuff like that into our plays, a brilliant starting point, and just making it normal to have worship music and singing around the house and praying together. I think as they get older, it becomes more of a conundrum. And I would say, as a mum with 4 children at very different stages, one thing I really have learned is that almost at every different age and stage of my children's lives, I have to think again, and actually I have to do quite a bit of trial and error. And so I think every child is different. You need to know your own child and explore possibly some of what are they into? So what is your child into right now? Like, I remember it being a brilliant discovery, for example, when I discovered the Action Bible. I don't know if any of you have come across that, but I've got boys who are really into comic strips and all that stuff. And the discovery of that Bible meant they gobbled it up. Two of my boys in particular read it cover to cover and then started again in a season of their life. And actually that did really help in their whole experience of worship, because what it meant is I could come in at the end of the night and say, what have you read today? Let's chat about that. What have you learned about God? And again, just in that discussion and in those questions, natural stuff would come up about how incredible God is or how powerful.
Yeah.
And in our discussion, again, that became quite worshipful. You know, they began to name attributes of God, which, even though it's spoken, again, it's not singing, really was then beginning to put language to worship. But that Action Bible wouldn't work now with my 14-year-old. So again, it's my next conundrum at the moment is I have teenagers. And so how can I now begin to help them when I'm not in the room as much, connect with God on their own? And I would say in this season, I've actually found that the corporate worship setting, particularly for one of my kids, has been really important. Worshipping with his peers, being in a real atmosphere of worship and extended worship in church has enabled him to really encounter the Holy Spirit in a way that then I think he would have struggled a bit more on his own at home, because, you know, in this season of life, he needs his peers and he needs that community. So as I say, Becky, I think it changes.
Yes.
Doesn't it?
And I bet with 4 kids, you're finding that your kids are not all the same, even at the same stage of life. And so I guess sometimes it might be tapping into their kind of natural tendencies, the way they express themselves.
Yeah, absolutely. So I mean, if I gave you a snapshot, I've got one child, my oldest, who loves singing, loves worship. She'd quite like to be a worship leader herself. I mean, so actually music is a thing for her. She finds it soothing. She'll fall asleep listening to it. Easy. Tick box. I've got my next son. He is a real thinker. He likes to read. He finds worship singing really hard. And actually that's a struggle for him. And it's something we talk about a lot. But actually, I think I kind of touched on this a moment ago, but in our conversations and in his exploration of the Bible, I can affirm, no, this is still worship. You're connecting and learning about God, and you've got a fascination, and that's wonderful. Now, the Holy Spirit might encounter him in worship one day in a really powerful way, and I will go on praying for that. And that's such a powerful thing as parents we can do. Just keep on praying for our children to encounter God in worship. But then, Becky, I have another child who just loves facts and knowledge. And this has been a really interesting thing. And I remember a season where he was just downloading all this stuff about the universe. Like, he loves like really nerdy, juicy details about things. And again, I think there's something there with him realizing, you know, him finding out about how the solar system works. Again, it's a bit back to what I was saying about nature, is an opportunity for me to go on a learning journey with him. And as he's reciting these facts, again, I can just go, isn't God amazing? It strengthens my faith that he's made this universe like that. And then finally, my youngest is active. He's all over the place. He's creative. He's into art. He doesn't like sitting still. And actually, I'm still learning with him as I go. He loves to dance. He'll often be the one helping us with actions in worship. He's quite physical. So I see him like a little David in some ways. You know, he runs around the church in the worship and does that funny motion called the worm. You know, but actually he doesn't at the moment really love to sit still, you know, pray together. All of that's really not his thing. So I'm still learning with him how to harness all this energy for God.
It's all about expressing, isn't it? In whatever way you do that. Expressing what does God engender in you? You know, what's your response to discovering a fact about God or feeling his presence? And some kids are physical, some are nerdy, like you say.
Yeah.
Some might like to draw or paint.
Yeah, absolutely. And we all know our own children. And that's it. And equally, they're different personalities, aren't they? And some love to have that kind of intimate space with us, and some are very private and would find that too intense and too difficult. And so it's enabling them to find strategies and tools for connecting with God on their own in their quiet space, and respecting that.
So just before we've got about 10 minutes left. So if you've got any questions, you want to type them into the comments and we can have a look at those later. We're just going to carry on really quickly. Becky, what's your kind of like top tips maybe, or for helping kids engage in worship at church?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I have devoted, Becky, many years of life and ministry to really being an advocate for intergenerational worship. And I do think that there is a massive amount that is learnt and absorbed when we worship as a whole church family together across the ages in the most diverse way possible. And so I think, I mean, that's a whole bigger thing, and not everybody has access to that. I appreciate it. But I think bringing children into our worship, if there are any church leaders listening in particular, and enabling them to witness and observe people engaging with God, older people, is a really important spiritual muscle. Just as children observe, and that's how they learn to walk and talk and all the rest of it. They learn to worship by being in that worship environment. That's how I learned as a child.
Yeah.
Along
because if we don't see something, we don't know it's a possibility for us, do we?
Don't, exactly. We don't even bring that expectation to it. And I think and then, you know, what I long for is that the worshipping space is accessible for children and is communicated in a way where children also can access it, perhaps with words that are simple at times, or actions if that's needed. And, you know, we've got lots of resources to support that. I think, again, as children become teenagers, that sometimes they go through stages where they feel more awkward and uncomfortable. And I think as a church community, giving real permission for that and exploring different things. Like we've been through an interesting time where our youth at church really, I mentioned it earlier, but they really came alive in a group setting on a church youth weekend away. And we recognized that actually giving them that space together, even though, again, I'm a massive believer in intergenerational worship, there are times where actually being together with your people is uniquely important. And that youth weekend away changed everything for them in worship. The Holy Spirit really came. They learned to pray for one another. They felt the Holy Spirit move in their bodies for the first time. And actually, they've then come back into our wider church setting on fire. And we're not really having to teach them much, therefore, at the moment. But that's
so some of it is about creating the environment. And I think sometimes as parents or carers with children, we can do that. You know, my daughter was never very keen on singing. You know, she didn't like singing. So, you know, what if you've got a little notebook, say you could draw a picture for God, or you can doodle or find some words to describe him or something. You know, even if we don't have much control over the service, we can help our kids by giving them different ideas. Maybe one of the really powerful things I've seen done is pointing out other people worshiping, saying, can you see that person over there? Look what they and God are doing.
Totally. And I actually remember when our children were little, I remember one time when somebody began to pray out in tongues very, very loudly near him, and he was like fascinated. And again, exactly as you said, Becky, just explaining into his ear, this is actually a really special language that God has given to this person, and they're just worshiping God with it. It is a way, again, isn't it, of just beginning to teach what it looks like and make it feel safe.
So how can say now, just before we end, I think it's really helpful to reflect on our own situation and our own children and think, oh, what might the next step be for our children? Because, you know, I think as a mum when my daughter was younger, I kind of wanted to get from A to Z very quickly and everything. I wanted her to be a full-blown worshipper. And actually everything is next steps. So what's one next step? So how can we think through that for each of our children? If we're listening today.
Yeah, I think it's brilliant. And I think it is important what you said before I answer that, to say, yes, we're in it for the long game here, aren't we? And what we want to do is eventually see our children grow to be people that are connected to God and surrendering their lives to him. Yeah. And I mean, again, I'd go back to, your child. And for me, what I would do, and I do it regularly with each of my children, it's like an analysis of, where are they at right now? Your child. What do they need help specifically with? And what might be a way of engaging that? And it might be something really small, because there are all sorts of tools out there. So if I give you a little example, I remember my daughter a couple of years ago was going away for a few days on a trip. And she finds the Bible reading really hard. But I said she's the one that actually does love music. But all I bought for her in that season, when I knew she was going to be away from us for a few days, I found these little colouring cards like this size, with a little outlined Bible scripture that you could colour in and then pretty patterns around it, and you could do one a day. It's like a 10-minute little activity. And you know, that for me it's bite size. It's something relaxing for her to do. It's got a Bible verse that might get in her head, even though she doesn't love reading the Bible at the moment, and just help to feed her heart for this season while she's away. Now, it could be something as small as that, but I felt that's what she needed then. For your child, it might be, you know, that actually they struggle to engage in worship and singing in a corporate setting or whatever, and it's just trying to find perhaps a genre of music that might appeal to them. Perhaps they just haven't found the right kind of songs. There's a breadth of worship music out there. Some of it's super cool, and it might be that you go on a little research mission together to think, okay, let's try and find some worship music that you enjoy listening to. So I think it really is back to what, you know, your child, what are they into, what do they need next in their relationship with God, and then doing a bit of research.
And don't be afraid to go a little bit like out there, you know, say you've got a kid who's a little passionate at the moment, is writing people, creating cards and something, you know, they could write a thank you card to God.
Lovely.
Just as much as grandma or something, or, you know, if their thing is they want to make cakes for people, you know, just point that to how can we use that to worship God? What's he said about worship? I think, yeah, you're right. It's about knowing your kid and little bite-sized steps, not the whole thing.
Not the whole thing. And I love what you say there, Becky. And again, it's about the blessing other people. And again, I remember a couple of Lents ago, actually, we just decided as a family that each day of Lent, and actually it wasn't Lent, it was Advent. Each day of Advent, we just had a big box for the food bank, and we'd go to the little corner shop and we'd pick something each day to go and put in that Advent box. So eventually by Christmas, we'd have a box full. And actually, projects like that are so lovely as a family to do, so simple. And again, it's saying, actually, this is an act of worship. We don't have to be singing a song in the kitchen, but this will bring joy to God's heart. It's getting creative.
Yeah, I think it is. Becky, I think we've run out of time, which is really sad, because I'm enjoying this conversation very quickly, and we could probably do it for another hour. But thank you so much. It's just opening up our kids' expectations, isn't it? And naming. I love what you said about naming what they're doing or what they're seeing, and helping them see that, you know, just to say that is an amazing rainbow, God, or you just helped me today, thank you, is worship. So they don't feel compelled just to limit it to singing in church on Sundays. But thank you, it's been great. Thank you very much.
Joy. Thank you, Becky. Thank you.
Thank you both. Yeah, it's a great discussion, and we hope to keep that going in a little moment. Can't speak. So we've definitely got one question coming, which we will put to Becky in a minute. If you have a question that hasn't been answered tonight, or something you've been mulling over, please do type it in the chat now, because Becky Drake would love to answer your questions. But just while you're typing in your questions and thinking of what you'd like to ask, Becky, would you mind telling us about the exciting conference you've got coming up very soon?
Yes, absolutely. So if for those of you that don't know anything about Worship for Everyone, my husband Nick and I run a ministry called Worship for Everyone, which is we're really championing all age worship, and we write songs for it and create resources, and just our message to the church is this is something to really invest in, and it's powerful and it's effective and it's important that we worship together. And so we're holding a training day called Equip on May the 18th at our church, which is Gas Street Church in Birmingham City Centre. And so it's an all-day, it's a Saturday conference, and actually we're doing it with Parenting for Faith. Parenting for Faith are going to be with us, and we've got two streams. One is a church stream looking at equipping church leaders and worship pastors, kids and youth pastors in growing and developing their intergenerational worship. But we've also got this home stream, which is largely going to be led by Parenting for Faith, but also we've got Catherine Hill coming from Care for the Family. And together they're going to be exploring, again, how we can help our children read the Bible and worship at home, and also just explore some really key topics that we're all hitting. Catherine Hill in particular, she looks at things like anxiety and its screen time, and how we can bring a faith-filled approach to some of these big topics. So we basically would love to invite you to join us if you're able to. Our tickets are available on worshipforeveryone.com. And so if you're a parent, carer, grandparent, or you're in church leadership, I think it will be a really, really helpful day to come together. That's my spiel, Lucy.
That's amazing. Thank you, Becky. We're so looking forward to joining you in May. It'll be great. And we'll pop the link in the comments as well. So if you think, oh, that sounds interesting, you can go and check it out. Do come along, do bring others from your church, take a carload, get a party together on the train, because it'll be a really great experience, I think, for you to have with your community that you're doing life with day in, day out. Becky, we've got some amazing questions for you. So we're going to kick off with this one. How long do you think corporate worship should last? Our church often goes 45 to 50 minutes. Is it reasonable for kids to be engaged for that long?
Oh, wow.
Going to go straight in there.
That's a
Question.
I would say that is a long time for young children. And in some ways, I feel a bit conflicted. I think that if the presence of God falls in a time of worship, and the Holy Spirit is present, in one sense, it's incredible for children to be in that space. And there's no doubt they will, as we talked about earlier, be learning, observing. As a child, I have some of my best memories in worship were in the Big Top at Spring Harvest with my mum and dad, where there would be really long stretches of worship. And I found it so comforting. And in that atmosphere of praise, I definitely learned so much about worship. So I think some of it depends on what is going on in that space and time. But I would say, as a general rule of thumb, and I say this to the people that we're training up in our church, I think children will generally get very, very restless in that time unless it's incredibly well led with them in mind. And there's a lot of explanation and engagement from the front about what's happening. Practically, I just think they get tired. So I personally would say that about 15 to 20 minutes is the maximum, really, a child will probably engage. I think beyond that, it's going to be a real push. That's my opinion.
Yeah, that's really helpful. Thank you so much, Becky. I'm sorry, I was sort of nodding away, but also popping the link for the Equip conference in the chat as well. So that's some great advice there. But also, if you want to look at coming to Equip, then that link should be in the chat now. Our second question is any tips for engaging children in worship in church? So I suppose that follows on quite nicely from what you were just saying, Becky, about the length of time we can sort of reasonably expect kids to be engaged for. How can we engage them in that worship, or possibly if the worship in our church goes on for a bit longer than would be ideal? Any tips there?
I do think song selection is really important. And I mean, this is why my husband and I began writing what we now call Worship for Everyone songs, because I think we recognize that traditionally you'd kind of have two sets of songs. You'd either have the kind of adult songs, or you'd have these very kiddie songs. And actually, one of our goals in our songwriting has been to try and write songs that are simple enough that children can sing and they're meaningful, so not too much metaphor or long words, but actually they're not sort of so basic and repetitive that then you're going to lose the adults and it's not meaningful for them. So I think finding the right songs will definitely aid unity and aid connection. I am a fan of actions, and I know they can be divisive, so there's a whole discussion we could have around that, but I think they definitely help to engage younger children, because some can't read yet. And actually they can copy actions if they're well led from the front. And so again, there's an opportunity for unity there if we can get the adults to buy into that. At least with our bodies we can unite, even if we can't fully with our voices yet for the little ones. But also I think for all of the ages, actions, if they're done well and they're crafted carefully, enable us to use our bodies as well as our voices. And a lot of children are very physical, and we all need to learn to express ourselves probably better through dancing. We're not very good often in Britain. We can be ever so wooden and reserved. So I think there is an opportunity to use actions for engagement. And then the other thing I'd say, Lucy, in answer to this question is, I think it needs to be led, again, I touched on this a moment ago, very intentionally to keep children engaged. When I'm leading worship with all ages present, I will speak a lot more from the front, so that I don't take anything for granted. I will often, if I, invite, for example, everybody to put their hands out in front of them, but explain why. The reason we do this is it's one way to say, I'm here for you, God. Or it's a way of saying, I'm imagining I'm giving you a hug, God, or whatever language I might want to put around it. But those little tips from the front give meaning again to a child who's just growing in their understanding. So there's just a few initial thoughts about how we can get engagement.
Yeah, so song choice, actions, and then really framing, not taking anything for granted, but framing everything that you're doing, in terms of, what it means and why we're doing it, why we might find it helpful. That's
Absolutely.
super helpful. Thank you, Becky. Yeah, and I can totally vouch for that in our church because we love singing Worship for Everyone songs and they do
Oh,
engage everybody. So I can just support what you were saying there. Let's find the next question. Our church is trying to engage families and children with sung worship. Any tips to encourage parents and adults generally to buy into this so the children will join in? That's an interesting kind of twist on that question. The kids might want to do it, but if the parents and adults aren't brought into the whole process, then that's going to be a challenge. So any tips there, Becky?
they need envisioning. I mean, I think a lot. I think a lot can be said from the front in really subtle little ways. So one thing that we would always do when children are in the room is almost like a script, and it doesn't matter if we say every single Sunday, is we will put right at the start of the gathering a load of values into why we're doing what we're doing. So, for example, I might say, we're all in the room together today, and the reason we do that is because God loves unity, and it's more powerful when we're all together. We better reflect the image of God, and actually, I address head on. There might be some of you that don't love joining in with actions, but I would just plead to you, for the sake of the little ones who can't read, I just name it all. Let's try and throw ourselves into it. Let's use our bodies, even if it feels a bit uncomfortable. And we quote a lot Romans 12. I know I'm going to forget it, aren't I? I think it's Romans 12:10, but is it Romans 12:11? I'm so sorry. You'll have to look it up.
I'll get Becky Cedric to look it up while you're speaking. She's our resident theologian.
There we go. Be devoted to one another in love. Honor one another above yourselves, or some translations say prefer one another. Romans 12 something. And basically, I think if you can, again, we can put a biblical foundation around it, people will buy in more. We often have to explain why it's important we're doing what we're doing. It's not just a knees up for the children, but actually sometimes it's important we honor one another and prefer one another above ourselves. And so, even if this style of worship isn't doing it for you today, actually we would urge you, let's all throw ourselves into it for the sake of unity. So I think some of that language it is really, really helpful. And again, therefore, sometimes it's our worship leaders and our church pastors that might need a little bit of training and input to enable them to talk like that to the congregation.
That's really helpful. Thank you. Yeah, really helpful for any worship leaders watching, definitely. There were ways we can frame that as well and approach that, which is great. Thank you so much. Now we've got, Becky has come back to us. I knew she would. Verse 10. So yeah, Romans 12, verse 10, if you'd like to look up that verse. Be devoted to one another in love, honor, or in some translations, prefer one another above yourselves. Great verse to quote in this scenario. We've got one more question. I think I've got one more question. If you are bursting to ask a question to Becky Drake and you haven't yet, you have the time it takes for me to ask this question of Becky and the time it takes for her to answer. So that's your last warning. You've got a question. Don't be shy. Do type it into the chat. We'd love to answer it. So the final question, I think, or possibly the penultimate question: how would you support a child who will sing praise and worship at home, but when in church gathering will sit and read instead of worshipping God?
Oh, yeah, that's interesting, because I would imagine it's often the other way around. So the first thing I'll say is I think it's incredible if they're worshipping God at home. So that's a great starting point, because actually that's the private hidden space. And I think it is much more common for a child to sing along, but at home it's more tricky. So don't worry. That would be my starting point as a mum. I think there's something brilliant going on at home there. I guess I'd want to understand from them why it is. Do they feel a bit more exposed at church? Is it safer to sit down? So you may have had that conversation with, I don't know if it's your child, the person answering the question, or something you're observing, but I'd want to understand, is it that the songs are different and they're finding it hard to access, and that would be a really interesting thing to find out. Is it just that there is no expectation and they'd rather read their book? Are they just a kind of quite self-assured type who just, I want to read, don't want to join in? I mean, children are just fascinating, aren't they? Who knows? So I think understanding it, first of all, and then it would be helpful from there on to address whatever's going on. Sometimes, there can be something so unusual. Like one of my kids once, I remember discovering, one of the only reasons they sat down was because we always sat on the front row as a family, because we're in leadership. We'd often be on the front, and it was that point that they just felt so awkward being right in front of the band. They just wanted to hide. But actually, once they joined the youth and they could sit a bit further back with their friends, they were fine. So I know I'm not really giving any much wisdom, because I think depending on what's going on there, that will inform really, you know, the response and what you kind of do about it. I don't know if you'd have any thoughts on that, Lucy.
Yeah, no, I think what you said is really wise, because we have a post on our site, Curious Questions, which is really all about this kind of the use of questions to really get to the bottom of what our kids are, how they're acting and why. And I mean, amongst other things. And I really love that you approach it in that way, because like you say, it could be different for every child, couldn't it? And it's really just about getting to the bottom of it. I mean, it could be that the key is wrong for them, you know, especially boys with their changing voices. They might struggle to sing if it's a woman worship leader, or a girl might struggle to sing when it's a male worship leader. You know, adults have those issues as well, don't they? And we just don't know if we don't ask. But like you, I would just be so grateful, I think, if that were my child, and they were enjoying worship. I kind of think they'll come around to corporate worship, and that's a way we mature in our faith, I think, isn't it? To see the importance of worshipping with our brothers and sisters and not just on our own. Oh, we do have one more question. I'm so pleased. This is so exciting. Maybe a silly one. There's no such thing as a silly question, just to reassure you. Where do you stand on shakers and ribbons? I find smaller children are often engaged with things in their hands. Any thoughts, Becky?
Oh, I mean, I think in a sense, anything goes. Know your context. That's what I would say. And I think that there is some context where that will work brilliantly. I mean, I do think the only question I ever have is this thing going to be distracting and unhelpful to others? So when you're saying shakers, you know, if you've got a fairly aging congregation and you've got, you know, 20 toddlers shaking these things, that might be so unpleasant for the rest of church that you want to limit that kind of thing. But interestingly, in our church at Gas Street, we've got 3 different locations. And one of our locations is a really lovely community church of about 150. And they did for a long time have this whole box of instruments. It massively engaged our children. So I think there's a real place for it. And flags, yeah, why not? Absolutely. I think if it's something that's helpful, try it. And I'm a real fan of experimenting as well. You know, I think it's great to have a go with this stuff and then review and think, you know, how do people feel about it? Is it working? And also, is it helping children, or actually are they just kind of running off with a flag and playing over here, and it's not really worship? You know, so it's just always good to review these things. Yeah, that would be my thought.
Yeah, that's super wise. Thank you. Yeah, sometimes we can confuse activity for engagement. They're not the same things, are they? And yeah, that's really helpful that you brought that up. Thank you. And we do have another question. They're all coming at once now, but this will be our final question. So we love Worship for Everyone songs in our church. Thank you for creating those songs and teaching on this. Have you ever used creative worship stations in the main service? And if so, what have you used?
Well, not massively in our church at the moment, because it's massive, and so our context wouldn't really lend itself to that kind of setup. We, at our Worship for Everyone conference, we did have a space actually that had creative stations, which was incredible. And I think I'm a massive fan of them. And I think because they give so much freedom of expression and allow people to engage in a completely different way. And also what I love about creative stations is it busts through that whole consumeristic thing, which we can often come to church, sit and be passive, but it demands engagement and participation. So I think they're brilliant, but I have to be honest, it's not something I can speak with masses of expertise into. I don't know if Becky Sedgwick can. Have you operated with creative stations more than me, Becky?
Occasionally, like we used to in intergenerational services, have places where people go. And I think the power of something like that, again, they need really good framing and properly stewarding as well. As you say, you know, some people like to use their imagination and colours to worship God. Some people like to use their bodies. Some people like to write, whatever it is. And it's this question of engagement and is activity, or are they engaged? And I think they can be massively powerful. They just need to be curated really well and keep drawing people back so you can give them permission to do it. If there may be a person who's like, this isn't worship, but But also, I'm very aware that for some of our smaller children who can't read, we need to equip them to worship in the ways that they can. So whether that's a shaker or it's drawing a picture or something. And I think you're right, it just shatters illusions, doesn't it, about worship? And suddenly, I don't know, like we used to go to Spring Harvest, see those amazing paintings the prophetic artists would do, and you look at them, you see, I can see God in that. And yeah, so I think there's a place for them. They just need careful curating.
That's super helpful, both. Thank you so much. Becky, Drake, thank you so much for your time tonight. It's been absolutely brilliant.
You are
Thank you, Cedric. Also, thank you.
It's been fun.
Although you are a colleague, so it is also, and your wisdom. Thank you. Just a couple of things to say if you're watching, if you've been watching this on your own, or maybe with a small group of people, but you think, gosh, this is great, I'd love to show this to more people, you can do that because all of these are recorded. They're popped on our website, so you can show this whenever you want. You can use it as a video training with our handouts. We will embed this video on our website tomorrow, and it will be the same link as the one we popped in the chat earlier on with the handouts on video, or the handouts, everything you need. Do get the date in your diary for our next pop-up small group, which is the 14th of May, Tuesday 14th of May, and we're going to be looking at helping our kids and teens engage with mission. So far this year we've done chat and catch, we've done worship. Next we're going to be looking at mission, and it's going to be really good, and we are welcoming Rachel Turner to join us for that one. So don't miss that, 14th of May, same time, 8 o'clock, BST it will be by then, British Summertime. How exciting. Right here on the Parenting Faith Facebook page. So thank you so much, everybody. Thank you for joining us. Take care. God bless. And yeah, I was going to say have a safe journey home, but you're probably already at home. But we look forward to seeing you on the next Facebook Live. So